Hello again, and welcome to the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. Tom Calhoun here to shine a light on the stories of those instrumental in Blues history. Before we get into Episode 9, I want to thank you real Blues fans for engaging with this project. I've been doing it since November and have enjoyed this work, but I've got some exciting news coming soon about the next level of the podcast and how you can become even more involved in the fun. The guest on this episode is Blues Hall of Famer and the first superstar forward in franchise history, the Red Baron, Red Berenson. He's now 85, but as you're about to find out, still sharp as a tack. Not only a great player, but a great coach on the pro and collegiate level. Stick around to the end to find out how to access some bonus material with Red. But it's time to drop the puck with the great Red Berenson. Red, welcome to the Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. So happy that you could join us.
Well, thank you, Tom, and I'm glad to be on. Anytime I'm talking to people in St. Louis, it just kind of perks me up because that was, as you know, or could expect, that was a big part, maybe the best part of my hockey career. And our family lived there for 10 years, so we just loved it.
Well, we loved watching you play and then coach later on. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I like to start these podcasts, Red, with a little family background. Why don't you tell us first of all about life with your mom and dad and your family back in Regina, Saskatchewan, if you would.
Well, although we were in the city, it was pretty rural. Like I remember when they first built wooden sidewalks, and we thought that was great. But it was cold and windy. The winters were long, and we had outdoor plumbing, and yet we had neighbors, and they all had outdoor plumbing. It was a hockey player's haven, really. You got outside all the time, and you're playing shinny, and then eventually you're playing hockey on all these natural ice rinks that were on just about every corner. And in our corner, there was a water tap where we got our water, and we used to leave that run when it was cold out, and the next day we'd have a rink. So it was a great place to grow up, and schools were handy. We walked to school. We played baseball in the spring and football in the fall, but hockey was, we couldn't wait for the water to freeze outside. That's when we knew it was hockey season.
Yeah. How about your mom, dad, sisters, brothers? Tell us about that.
Well, I had two younger sisters, and my dad was a fireman. He was in the Second World War in the Navy, and so he was gone for a little bit. I was born in 1939, so the war wasn't much after. And so he was gone for a year or two, but he came back and was a career fireman, but he was a jack of all trades. He could fix anything or build anything. So I kind of grew up tagging along with him and helping build houses or garages or driveways or whatever it was. And it was a good way to grow up because you had to be independent. I had a number of jobs when I was a kid and then again in high school. But hockey was still my favorite. I couldn't wait. You know, like a lot of kids, you don't necessarily have a lot of self-confidence all the time, but some of the time you do. And that was clear for me. And when it was hockey season, I mean, I became a lot taller and a lot better and a lot this and a lot that. And then in the other seasons, I was 2 or 3 years younger than the other players because I remember being 12 years old in 9th grade in school. And so here I was sitting beside an 18-year-old that looked to me like Marilyn Monroe. And I was 12. So anyway, school was good. I had a lot of help from my mom's dad, Uncle Bill. He made sure I learned how to read and write before I ever went to school. So good for him. He didn't have a son, but he treated me like one. So I had a lot of family support along the way, and I think that that pays off for you in the long run.
So was your uncle the guy that got you started playing hockey, or how did that happen?
Well, it happened when I was about 2 years old, and I guess my mother used to say later when when I got older, she said, you know, you were a handful. And so she would just put these skates on. I was 2 years old. They bought some old used skates and got me outside, and there was a rink across the road. And so just go over there and play. And of course, eventually playing meant skating and then playing hockey. And so I did. She got me going just to get me out of the house, and then I had to learn from the other kids and start copying them. And it was a great place to learn and play and grow.
Well, it sounds like it would be. Regina, for those who are geographically challenged, is the capital city of the province, and about halfway between Winnipeg and Calgary, if you know where those big cities are in Canada. And if you draw a straight line up and down the map from the North Carolina Montana border, you might run pretty close to Regina, population 225,000 plus. So there's the geography lesson for this podcast. And I have to apologize to our listeners. I have a little throat thing going on tonight, and hopefully I can get through this thing and not distract too many people. So junior hockey comes along. You participated in a couple of Memorial Cups as a member of the Regina Pats, and then later on the Belleville McFarlands in the IIHF tournament in 1959. I grew up in Belleville, and you played for the Belleville Ontario McFarlands. Tell us about your junior and just about to turn pro, or just about to go to Michigan for a college experience.
Well, Tom, how that happened, and before we forget about Saskatchewan, there's some other more notable hockey players from Saskatchewan, starting with Gordie Howe
Yeah,
and
get to
Glenn
him a little
Hall.
later.
Glenn Hall was from Saskatchewan, and Bernie
Sure.
Federko was Saskatchewan, and on and on. There's
Yeah.
a laundry list of them. So I wasn't alone out there on the prairies. But back to our trip to Belleville, it started off by my going to Michigan. I decided to go to college, and it was kind of against the grain in those days. They
Right.
didn't care if you went to school. They just wanted you to play pro hockey. And I decided I wanted to have something to fall back on after hockey. And so I went to Michigan. And after one semester, you couldn't play your freshman year. You had to sit out and just practice.
Hmm.
And I was fine with that. And Ann Arbor was 40 miles from Detroit. So we got to see the Red Wings play from time to time. And then they would come over and practice in our building. So when the Ice Capades were on at the Olympia. And so anyway, after one semester, Belleville McFarland's called me. Billy Ray actually was a spokesman for them, getting ready for the World Championships. And he had seen me play in the Memorial Cup, and he thought I could be a help to their team. They were allowed to pick up 3 players and so-called imports. And of course, a few of their older players had retired or been traded or whatever. So there was room on the team for 3 players. And Pete Conacher was one of them, and another kid named Bobby. It's a French name, but a good player. Wasn't Bobby Rousseau, but he never played in the NHL, but he was a good, honest player. And myself, I was the youngest. I was 19. So after one semester at Michigan, I find myself playing one game at Belleville. And Tom, the next day we left for Europe, and we were gone for 6 weeks
Wow.
until we played the World Tournament in Prague, Czechoslovakia. But we were all over Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Austria, Italy. I mean, we played in Cortina, Italy. If you haven't been there, they had the World Olympics or the Winter Olympics there one time, and I can see why. It was like Banff or Jasper or Squaw Valley or any of those great Winter Olympic sites. But I got to see all that and play in outdoor rinks, and then the finals were played in indoor rinks. And it was the senior team, as you remember, Belleville McFarland's, and we had players as old as 42 or 43, which in those days was really old. But Gordie Bell was our goalie, and he was an old, experienced goalie and a good guy. And Ike Hildebrand was our playing coach, and Floyd Crawford, father of all these Crawford boys that came along, he was our captain. And they were all great leaders, and so that really helped me stay on track. And just couldn't wait to get to Czechoslovakia. And that's in the days where things weren't as free over there, and it was not like Germany was still at the end of the devastation from the war, and that was an education for all of us to see what was going on in Europe at that time.
Well, you win a world championship with the McFarlands, then it's off to Michigan, where you earned All-American honors and led the NCAA with 43 goals in the 61-62 season. And after that 61-62 season, you signed with the Montreal Canadiens, and you were in their system for 5 seasons, including a Stanley Cup winning team. That must have been a thrill as a young guy.
Well, it was. It was, it's every hockey player's dream, but when you're playing, you don't know, what's going to happen or what could happen. But Montreal obviously had a great history, and I was thrilled just to be on the team with players like Beliveau and Henry Richard and Jacques Plante, Boom Boom Geoffrion and Dickie Moore, and the list goes on. And Rocket Richard had just retired 1 or 2 years before I got there. I got to know him off the ice, but and I'd seen him play, but never got to play with him. But it was he and Gordie Howe that were kind of the top two stars in the game at that time, and everyone had their opinion about which was the better. But Rocket definitely had a place near the top, if not at the top. So my time in Montreal was spent most of the time being a part-time player or a utility player, and you didn't get a chance to play much if you're playing behind Beliveau and Henry Richard,
Right.
and so on. So it was not all fun and games. It was trying for me to try and even make the regular lineup. But in that year in '65 when we won, I ended up on a checking line with Henry Richard and Claude Provost, and the series went 7 games, and we were on the ice every shift that Bobby Hull's line was on the ice. So I got to be a checking left winger that, I'd never played left wing and wasn't considered a checker, but I learned how real quick when you're playing against those guys.
I'll
So that
bet.
was a great experience, and we won. But then, as time would have it, my plans were because things weren't going as well, that I was going to go back to school and get my MBA, Master's in Business, just in case hockey didn't work out. And so I did. We played in the Stanley Cup Finals. We had the parade, and the next day I was driving to Ann Arbor to sit down in the business school and start my MBA. So I was cut from a little different cloth, I think, than most of the players.
Right. Yeah, most of the players, I'm sure, were hockey 100%, and you were already working on that backup plan. And that worked out pretty good. We'll get down to your coaching career a little bit later on, but then you get traded to the New York Rangers. And I looked at the statistics of those years, and that probably wasn't the greatest experience for you there in New York.
No, I'm glad you're not reading them off. And I really liked Emil Francis. He was the manager and coach, and he was a Saskatchewan boy. And he liked boys from the prairies and players, but it just didn't work out. I remember breaking my toe in Montreal. Bobby Rousseau hit me with a slap shot, and I was out for a few weeks. And then I came back on Christmas night and broke my cheekbone. Eric Nestorenko elbowed me near the end of it. It was my first game in a month, and broke my cheekbone. And so that sent me back, and I never really got any traction in New York, but we had a pretty good team. And actually Phil Goyette from the Canadiens, and then eventually the Blues,
Hmm.
was our top centerman in New York until Jean Rattel got going with Vic Hadfield and Rod Gilbert. So we had some good players in New York, but I couldn't wait to leave. And I told Emil Francis one time, I said, Emil, I appreciate you giving me a chance here, but I think you're wasting your money and I'm wasting my time. And he knew what I meant. And as soon as Rattel recovered from a back surgery situation, I was traded to St. Louis, and I couldn't have been happier.
Yeah, well, expansion worked out pretty good for the Red Baron, traded to the Blues in 67, 68. And of course, you and Barclay Plager came in that deal to the Blues, and you were the catalyst for the Blues to three straight Stanley Cup final appearances in 68, 69, and 70. And there was a lot of other good players on that team as well. Of course, Glenn Hall was outstanding in goal, and you might name off a few others.
Well, a lot of these guys I played against, but there were a few of them I played with. The players that St. Louis drafted in the initial expansion draft. I played with Jimmy Roberts in Montreal, and so it was, and even in Hull, Ottawa, we were both sent down for a while, and I played with him, and I knew what Jimmy would bring to St. Louis, and it would be all about winning. I'd played against Bob Plager, but Bob and Barclay and I all at one time were in the New York organization,
Right.
but I didn't know them personally. But I realized uh, how driven they were and how competitive they were and how tough they were when I got to St. Louis and played with them. And Noel Picard, I played with Pic in Montreal, and I knew the kind of policeman he could be, and certainly he did that in St. Louis. I'd played against Al Arbor. Al Arbor had been a great American League defenseman and NHL defenseman, and he was near the end of his career in St. Louis. But boy, he was a great role model and captain and leader for our team. And then Scotty kept getting these former Montreal players that he knew could help our team win, even though they might have been older. And so we had a player like Ab McDonald, we had Phil Goyette, Dickie Moore, and the legendary Doug Harvey. Like when I came to school at Michigan, Doug Harvey was the Bobby Orr of the NHL.
Right.
And year in and year out, and he was tremendous. And then I played with Doug in Quebec for a while, when Quebec was a farm team of Montreal. And I realized, that he was on the downside of his career. But when he got a chance in St. Louis, he really made a difference in our team. So they knew Scotty and Len Patrick did a great job of piecing together a lot of players. And there's more I could mention: Gary Sabern, Terry Crisp,
Sure.
and on, Frank St. Marseille, guys that just needed a chance to play and prove they could play in the NHL. And they got that chance in St. Louis, and they really took advantage of it.
That was it was a great way to introduce the sport to young people like myself. I was pretty young in those days, and a lot of other people fell in love with the sport because of those early blues rosters. So, shocking trade to Detroit for Gary Unger in 70, 71. Gary was our last guest on this podcast. And of course, well, we'll get to the rest of the story in a little bit. But did you see that one coming? Did you know that there was something in the works to trade you to Detroit on that one?
Well, yes and no. I had become the president of the NHL Players Association, and they had just started about 3 or 4 years. In fact, they started the year expansion started. And Al Eagleson was the leader. He was a lawyer out of Toronto. And the first three presidents of the Players Association were all Toronto Maple Leaf players. I think Bob Pulford was one. I'm not sure if Bob Bond wasn't one, but each one of them were coaxed by their ownership or challenged by their ownership or threatened to give it up and just worry about playing hockey. And so they passed it on to me. And I said, well, I've finished college. I think I can represent the players well. I'm not really a union guy, but I think there's a lot of things we can do to help the game, help the players, and keep the game moving as far as the owners are going. And so I think Eagleson made such a noise up in Toronto that the Solomons were feeling it, and they came to me and they asked me to step down. And I said, I don't want to step down. I'm going to do this for a while and try and help the players and try and help the game. And I'm not here to hurt the owners or anything. We love the Solomons. But when I turned that down, I think the wheels started to turn. It was about a week later, and I was in Detroit. So it broke my heart, Tom. I was, I was all in St. Louis, and having to leave, even though it was going to Detroit, even though I would go there and play with Gordie Howe. St. Louis is where my heart was. You know, I'd played in Montreal and New York, two other original six teams, but it wasn't until St. Louis where I got to be a bigger part of the team. And with Scotty Bowman leading the way as a coach, um, I just felt that was a great spot for me.
Yeah, and it was, and you got to come back in the 74-75 season where and then finished out your playing career here in St. Louis. A little bit maybe rejuvenated when you came back to St. Louis after the Detroit years.
I think so. Yeah, we had good teams in Detroit and good players, but we never made the playoffs. And it was night and day difference between St. Louis and Detroit in those days. And even though Detroit had Gordie Howe and Alex Delvecchio and Gary Bergman and some of the, their top guns, and Mickey Redmond came about the time I came, and he scored 50 goals, but we still never made the playoffs. So that was what it means now to make the playoffs. Well, then, you had to make the playoffs, and we just were expected to make the playoffs. So it wasn't a it was a good chance to get back to St. Louis and see if I could help. I knew my role would be different. I was an older player, but we went through a number of different coaches there. But Emil Francis he was our general manager, and Emil knew how to run an organization, and he did a good job. And we got good players he drafted. Look at all the great players they drafted. The Federico and Sutter and Babbage and Turnbull and on and on. I mean, the list goes on. Now we were a lower placed team, and that's why we got, a chance to draft those players, but they drafted well. And St. Louis was like a family when they were even when I came back as a older player, I realized that, the years that we spent just starting St. Louis when there were only 8,000 people in the building for most of that first year until we started to really win near the end and keep going in the playoffs. And then it was pretty much sold out after that. But it brought the players and the city together. The team did, and the Solomons did. It was like a marriage of players and their owners. And you don't see that very much in pro sports. So we appreciated the owners and everything they did for us. And I think they appreciated everything we were doing for them.
Yeah, Susie Matthew was on this podcast back in December, and a lot of the same things you're saying now, she said then, and it was that family feel.
Well,
So,
it was a great time in St. Louis Blues hockey history, but we still hadn't won a Stanley Cup. But going back and playing was great. It was good for me and hopefully good for the team. But by then, Jimmy Roberts was a veteran player. Bob Plager was in Bark. And, we were all getting up there,
yeah.
and it was time. And so I remember one year, I think Claude LaRose might have been one. It was about five of us retired, and that kind of opened the door for the Federicos and kind of handed the torch to them.
And you got to coach them because you joined the coaching staff in '78. Didn't take long until Red Berenson won the Jack Adams Award as Coach of the Year in '80-'81. And that's that group with Federico and Sutter and Babbage and all those guys, right?
That was a fun time. It was, and you can't talk about that team without mentioning Mike Liut.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you have to have a great goalie, and we had a great goalie, and that just gave our team more confidence to play with the puck and so on. And we had some. I think one year we had 9 20 goal scorers, and nobody in the league came close to that. And then besides Bernie scoring whatever he scored, 35 or 40 goals, and then Babbage scored 50 goals or 50, might have been 56, and so on. And Sutter was just a rock for that team as a captain and a young leader. And of course, Barclay Plager was the coach, and I was the assistant. And then Bart got sick, and I had to take over. And I'd never been a head coach anywhere, and really never coached anywhere. But Emil gave me the chance, and the players responded, and we had a lot of fun with it. So I never wanted to be a coach, Tom. It was never on my bucket list. I wanted to play, and then I wanted to get on with my life. But Coaching turned out to be uh, just like a disease, it was, but a good disease, something you really, really like. You never thought you'd like it, but you like it.
Yeah, I've said on this podcast before, I never really wanted to be a public address announcer either, but but that came along and kind of fell in my lap, and it's been a wonderful part of my life. So things like that happen, whether you have control of them or not. Tell us about the transition, Red. And we're talking with Red Berenson. And if you're just joining us now, the great Red Berenson, Blues Hall of Famer, transition from blues coach on the pro level to going back to your alma mater, University of Michigan in 1984 and becoming the coach there. What was that decision process like?
Well, I was actually I was in Buffalo for 2 years after I left St. Louis, and you remember those were the days when there was the Ralston Purina owned the team, and they were great owners, but they changed CEOs, presidents, and CEOs, and we were all wondering how that would affect their opinion of the Blues. The Blues were a good team, but I can't tell you we were making money. I don't know how the accounting went, but they made a statement publicly that any of their subsidiaries that weren't making money at the time would be sold off immediately.
Right.
And sure enough, the Blues were in that category. So I ended up, being in Buffalo with Scotty Bowman and Jimmy Roberts again. Scotty was the GM and head coach, and Jimmy and I were the assistants. And we drafted players like Phil Housley and Tom Barrasso and Dave Andrechuk and so on. So it was a good time in Buffalo for these young players, and we were moving up. And then the call came from Michigan. And I remember asking Scotty, "What do you think?" And Scotty always had a soft spot for college. He saw himself as kind of a hockey professor, and which he still is, and he liked that part of the game. And so I took the job in Michigan, and of course I thought all they needed was a coach, but I know our team wasn't very good at the time. They'd finished in ninth place the last couple of years. So I was on the recruiting trail and trying to uh, build a team, not unlike St. Louis, with players that could score, players that were good with the puck, players that were good team players, players that could check and pay the price to win, and so on, and good goalies. And ironically, when I got after a few years, I got this young goalie named Marty Turco, and I called Mike Liut, and Mike had finished his career, and he was back in the Detroit area, and he was going to Wayne State University getting his law degree. And I asked Mike, I said, "Mike, I need a favor. I need you to come over here and work with my young goalie. I think this kid is going to be a great player." And so he did, and Turco was, and we went on to start winning championships. And so don't let anyone tell you that you can win a championship without a great goalie, and just look at St. Louis in 2019 and so on. But that was a great experience at Michigan. And of course, I didn't know I'd be here for 33 years as a coach. And all of a sudden, I was 77. I'm still coaching in Michigan. It was, it's kind of like raising a family, Tom. You recruit these kids, and then you coach them, and you help them develop, and you make sure they're going to school, and then you watch them when they graduate. And we've got kids that are neurosurgeons, and kids that are lawyers, and orthopedic surgeons, and kids that are all over the NHL as well. So it's been really good for me, and I think it's been good for Michigan as well.
Well, there's no question about that. Folks, listen to this resume from Red Berenson as head coach at Michigan. 33 seasons, as he mentioned, 11 Frozen Four appearances, NCAA champions in 96 and 98, 11 regular season conference championships, 9 conference tournament titles, qualified for the NCAA tournament in 22 consecutive seasons, 91 to 2012, which is the longest such streak in NCAA hockey history. That's a pretty good coaching resume there, Red Baron.
Well, I've always preached about going to school to have something to fall back on, and I still haven't had a real job, Tom. Like I'm 85 now, and I'm still doing a little work with Michigan fundraising for the hockey program, but it's not a job. I've got an office that I occasionally visit, but I'm kind of working on my own terms, and it's been great. But I'm still waiting for that first job so I can apply my education.
Well, I think you did pretty well with that education. So, of course, when people think of Red Berenson, one of the first things that comes to mind is that amazing six-goal game in Philadelphia on November the 7th, 1968. It's not the only time it's been done, but when you did it, it hadn't been done since 1944. Daryl Sittler, in his famous 10-point game in 1976, he got six goals after you, but it hasn't been done since he did it. Uh, some of your memories from that game. One of our listeners of the podcast told me told me to ask you what's your most vivid memory from that game.
Well, I think a couple of things that happened before the game, and Ab McDonald was my roommate, and we got to the hotel. I think we'd played in Pittsburgh the night before, and we'd come from Pittsburgh, and before that we'd been in Detroit, and Camille Henry had scored a hat trick in Detroit. And I remember saying to myself, "This is great." And I set him up on one of the goals, but I said, "Boy, that's what I need. I need something like a hat trick to really get going." And so Ab and I rooming together, and there was no power in the hotel, so they had candle lights and flashlights. So we literally got to the hotel and we went to bed and got up the next day to play Philadelphia, who, we had quite a rivalry brewing with Philadelphia, and uh, and so that night we got going, and I found myself playing against Van Imp and Watson, Joe Watson, and they were the defense pairs that they lined up against us every shift. And of course, they had the last change; they were the home team, and uh, and the game was pretty close in the first period. And Jacques Plante was playing goal that night for us, and so we had Glenn Hall and Jacques Plante. So goals against were they were the best in the NHL with those two and with our team. Nevertheless, I got around Van Imp in the last minute of the first period and scored. And I remember saying to myself, "Thank God I can still score." Now it's only November 7th of the season. We just started in October, but I was still desperate to start scoring, and so I scored that goal. And we went in. It was 1-0. The players are talking about we have to do this and do that and so on. Well, the next period we went out and just put their backs up against the wall. We got 4 goals. I had 4 goals in that period, and had an assist on another one by I think Crispy scored that night too. And we come in after the second period, and Doug Harvey says, "Well, Red, this would have been a good game if you wouldn't have shown up. But now it's, we've got this team down, I think 6 or 7-0, and so we went out. We got the shutout, and I got the seventh goal. But a little thing with the sixth goal, my sixth goal, little thing after the fifth goal, I gave Tommy Woodcock, who was our trainer and equipment manager, combined, and I gave him my stick. It was cracked and the tape was coming off, and I just felt like I better get another stick. I don't want this one breaking on me. Well, he gives me a stick, and I get the puck, and sure enough, I'm coming down left wing, and the goalie was he was a little suspect because I'd already got 5 on him that night. Doug Favell was the goalie.
Yeah.
And they had Perrant and Favell, and that night Favell played, and he was a good goalie. But in that night, I had his number for some reason, so I'm aiming for the top shelf on the short side, and the puck went over his glove on the glove side in the top of the net, and everybody's saying, "Great shot!" That's not even where I was shooting. It was about 4 feet wider. But it went in, and it was a little bit of history, I guess. But the players were great. Glenn Hall, he humbled me right away. He said, "Well, at least you were plus tonight, Brad." and so on. And so we had I think the players were more excited than I was. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was jumping up and down or anything like that. It was fine. I'm having a good game. I'm not surprised, but I didn't think 6 goals meant anything special, but it stood up for a long time.
Sure enough, sure as heck did. Yeah, and I don't see you as a trash talker. I mean, there's a lot of that goes on in sports these days, but I would think if you were a trash talker, you could have given it to Ed Van Imp that night pretty good. 'Cause, apparently, you skated around him several times in that game.
Well, he was a good defenseman. He just that night we had his number, and it wasn't just me, Tom. When I listened to the Dan Kelly broadcast, like there was no TV of the game. The game was televised, and then they would just use that tape over for the news or weather or something else, and so there was no record of it. There's no video, but there was audio, and you listen to Dan Kelly, and it's Camille Henry up to Ab McDonald to Berenson. It's Picard to Jimmy Roberts or Bill McCreary, and up to Berenson, over to Berenson, and so on. And I ended up being the beneficiary of all the hard work, but it was 6 full strength goals. There were no power play goals, no shorthanded goals, no empty net goals. It was one of those games where you look back, and I didn't think twice about that. But the way the game has gone now, there's usually if you have a good night, you've scored on the power play. But on that occasion, it was all 6 full strength goals. So we were +7. We were on the ice for 7 goals for, and that felt pretty good. And Van Imp, on the other hand, was on the ice for 7 goals against, and I had no mercy for him. Like that was too bad. But he broke enough sticks over my arm where I've had enough. I've taken it from him, and I'm going to give it back.
We're talking with the great Red Berenson on this edition of St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends. And, Red, when you've come back to town to participate in an alumni game or something that requires you to put the skates back on, everybody marvels about, hey, Red looks great. Looks like he could still play. And you look great on the video that we're recording right now. And I'm sure a lot of people, myself included, would like to know how you keep yourself in shape and hang with the younger guys when you come back into town.
Well, I think it's been good to be in pro hockey all those years, Tom. I mean, you have no choice. And so I took it upon myself to do a little extra work and make sure I was on my game. And the skating was a strength in my game. So I always felt like I needed to be really fit, and maybe I've got the genes, I don't know, but I've been really fortunate that way. So I still skate, being in the game all those years, and then even coaching all those years. You're still on the ice, and it feels good. And then when I got back to Michigan, I got playing for the Red Wing alumni team when they needed me, and I still play for them. And so they're good. I mean, they're all guys in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I'm in my 80s. So, but they've been good. Mickey Redmond's up there with me. He's in his 70s, I think. So we have a couple old guys, but I love playing, and it's more fun now than it was when I was playing for a contract.
Nobody's trying to break a stick over your arms either, usually, huh?
That's right.
So, you mentioned Scotty Bowman a couple of times and Al Arbor, and of course they went on to coaching greatness in their own right after leaving the Blues. Were you surprised at all that the Blues let guys like that get away back in the early days of the franchise? I mean, I know Scotty had a little disagreement with the ownership back in those days and went his own way after that. Who knows what would have happened had the guys like that stuck around a little bit, huh?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Scotty was, he still hadn't won a Stanley Cup when he left here, but he was destined to. He was one of those coaches, and he had worked for Montreal as a young scout. And ironically, you remember the story, but a lot of people wouldn't. That there was a player named Jean-Guy Talbot that the Blues had,
Right.
and Scotty was a GM, and it was Scotty that reached out to see if Talbot would come to St. Louis. Talbot was the person that hit Scotty over the head with his stick and ended Scotty Bowman's playing career.
Forgot about
And
that.
so Scotty became a scout, and then he became a junior coach, and then a farm team coach, and then in St. Louis was his first NHL head coaching job. But I think he always had his eye on Montreal as being the top of the ladder. And when he got his chance, obviously he took advantage of it, and he won about 5 Stanley Cups there, and then two more in Pittsburgh, and then another one or two in Detroit.
Right.
So he was the best coach I played for, and one of the best coaches ever. And I don't think there's any disputing that. And I say that it's not just that he had good players; he made players play better. He made the star players play honest, and he made the role players feel important. He knew that defense won championships, but you had to have scores to get there, and he knew how important goalkeeping was. I mean, he's like a hockey encyclopedia even today, and he's in his 90s. But you talk to Scotty, you get him on one of these podcasts, and
Just going to
you
ask you
probably have.
if you
He
thought he
will.
would do
You'll
that.
be marveled at his memory and his knowledge and so on. And so I had the privilege of playing for him a little bit in the Montreal farm system, and then in St. Louis, and then coached with him in Buffalo, and coached with him in one of the Canada Cups. But we're still lifelong friends. We still share some heart issues that he's had and I've had, so we trade notes on medications and stuff like that.
Well, Bruce Affleck has given me Scotty's number. I guess I'll have to get up enough courage to call him and ask him to come on here. You think he'll do that?
I think he'll do it. I really do. I think he's probably done enough Zoom calls to know how to operate it. And but if you're going to talk about the Blues and the people on the team, and uh, and most of those guys are still friends of Scotty Bowman, like Glenn Hall and
Hmm.
Stabber, and of course the Plaguers were, and so on. Like we were, as much as he was a hard driving coach, we all had so much respect for him. We became lifelong friends. So even though we were on different organizations in the years to come, but so he's a real keeper. You get him on, and you'll get the best.
So you said you have an office there at the University of Michigan. Do you still help out Coach Naranjo there and stay in touch with the program pretty well, I guess?
I stay in touch with the program. I'm not coaching, Tom. I've told Naranjo I don't want to coach, and I don't miss coaching. But if you want to know what I think about anything, I'm a resource for you. My office is 10 feet away from his.
Yeah.
So, but those young coaches are busy. The game is different now. The preparation, the video, the statistics, everything is a little different about the game. But a lot of things aren't different. And so when I talk to them all about penalty killing or face-offs or power plays or length of shifts and so on, it all goes back in the hard work and so on and so forth. Sometimes they forget about that stuff and they're so worried about a system. But he's doing a good job for a young guy that never really was a head coach before. But he's got a lot of good things going for him. He's got a good staff, got good kids on the team, good students. And you look at the Michigan players in the NHL. There's at least 25 of them today playing in the NHL, and some of them played for me, and some played for Mel Pearson, and now the Naranjo era is on. So he knows I'm behind him 100%, and so I think that's good. I got to know some of the players. Like I recruited Quinn Hughes, but I never got to coach him,
Ah.
and so on. And Jack Hughes at one time said he was coming to me if he goes to school, he's coming to Michigan. And then we ended up getting Luke Hughes, after Jack turned pro right away out of junior, and then Luke came along, and he was a high draft pick. And I mean, there's an amazing family, and I still follow them even though I never coached them.
Well, shifting gears just a little bit, I did a little research before I was going to talk with you here tonight, and I looked back at the Blues 67-68 roster. and every player on it was Canada born in the nation of Canada. And I just want you to talk a little bit about how things have changed so dramatically in the NHL. We've got players from practically every country in Europe and even some from the Orient these days. And the Blues have a player from Australia on the roster right now. So things are a lot different than they used to be back in those days.
It's amazing, Tom. And of course, when I broke in the NHL in 1962, there was one American player in the NHL. Now there are only 6 teams, but still, these are the best players anywhere. And one American player, and that was Tommy Williams. There was one college player, and that was Red Hay, who was from my hometown also, and he was playing for Chicago. And there was one European player, and his name is slipping. It's circling the wagons right now, and I'm not gonna. But he wasn't a star player or an impact player, but he definitely was a Swedish player. Uh, might have been Sterner, might have been a name like Ulf Sterner, but one of your listeners will know, and they'll call in and remind you, and maybe remind me if I'm still on. But nevertheless, think about the whole NHL: one European player, one American, and one college player. Well, if you look at the NHL now, at least a third of the players have gone to college. And in that mix, there's a lot of American players, but a lot of Canadian players too that came down to U.S. colleges. So I'm a big college guy. And on the other hand, the U.S. has done such a good job in spreading the game. When the NHL expanded to St. Louis, look what happened to St. Louis. And look at all the players that have come out of St. Louis. That wouldn't have happened if the Blues didn't have a franchise in 1967. And now we've got players coming out of Florida. The NHL, anywhere the NHL goes, there's going to be players coming out of there. Southern California, and so on. So the Americans and Canadians now are, I can't tell you there's that many more Canadians than there are Americans in the NHL. And then look at all the great European players, including Russians.
Right.
So the game is better. I think the fans are better off for it. All over the country in the U.S., like my granddaughter lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Danny Ray, if you're watching, we love you. And you know what we really love about you is that she wants to go to every NHL building and see that team play. And she's not even close to. And the nearest team, I think, is Dallas. But she's been to half a dozen, and that's her goal. And she's about 25. So we're going to try and help her fulfill that goal. But that's the way hockey is now. And then while I'm talking about a girl being interested, I have granddaughters that are hockey players. And look at the Canada-U.S. women's hockey, and look at the World Championships of women's hockey, and how the North America is dominating. The girls in North America are dominating the world scene of women's hockey. So now they've got their own pro league. And they've got college hockey going and so on and so forth. So hockey has grown in every perspective, Tom.
No question about it. Well, this is my final question on all of these podcasts. Because it's a Legends podcast, we want to know how you would like to be remembered, Red Berenson. What is the Red Berenson legacy?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I've just been doing what I'm doing, and I tried to do the right thing. And I've been lucky. My wife of 65 years is with me, and we have great 8 grandchildren, 4 great children. We've been really blessed. We lived the dream. We got to make the NHL. I got my education. We've had a great family, and that's about it, Tom. There's no, the 6 goals is nice, but it's not something I lose any sleep over anymore. I mean, everybody's got to have a good game once in a while. So that was my time. But there's not any one thing that stands out except I made it. I finished school. That was what I wanted to do. And there were only 6 teams. It wasn't easy. And guys like Bark and Bob and Jimmy Roberts and all the guys I came up with they all did the same thing. Good for them. So we're proud of what we did, and that's about it. loving life.
Well, it was good to see you at the recent Hall of Fame banquet, and hopefully we'll see you for, I don't know, 15, 20, or 30 more, huh? What do you say?
Well, we go one at a time, Tom, but that seems to work better than taking big lumps. I don't think I ever had more than a 2-year contract. So that works out fine.
Okay. Red, thanks so much for your time. I do appreciate it so much, and I know our listeners of this podcast will be thrilled to hear some of your stories. And take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time you're in town.
Good. Well, thank you, Tom, for playing injured tonight. So good for you. Now you know how the players feel.
Yeah, right. Thanks for watching episode 9 with Red Berenson. But we have bonus material with Red. We asked him to respond rapid fire to the names of former teammates and coaches and players he coached at Michigan who are now in the pros. Stay tuned to our social media to find out how to access this bonus mini episode. Visit PAGuyTom.com or BluesHockeyLegends.com for the latest info. Video of the podcast is available the Monday after release of the audio. While you're here, please subscribe to our channel for notification of our next Legends episode. Tom Calhoun here saying thanks for watching, and let's go Blues!